Psychologists have found that death anxiety is the hidden engine behind almost every fear you carry. The fear of failure, of being forgotten, of losing control. But here's the problem: if you never identify what you're actually afraid of, you spend your whole life running from a shadow. This video shows you how to stop. In the next 12 minutes, I'll show you number 1, why death anxiety isn't really about death and what it's actually driving in your daily behavior. Number 2, what the ancient Vedic understanding of consciousness gets right that modern psychology is only now catching up to. Number 3, a practical way to loosen death anxiety's grip on your decisions, starting today. Let's get into it. A man named David, mid-40s, successful by every visible measure, came to a point where he couldn't stop checking his phone at 2 a.m., not for messages, just checking. He told a therapist he was afraid of wasting his life. The therapist asked a simple question: "What does wasted mean to you?" David went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Gone, like I was never here." That wasn't a productivity problem, that was a death problem, and David had no idea. Terror management theory is one of the most well supported frameworks in existential psychology. It was developed by Jeff Greenberg, Sheldon Solomon, and Tom Pischinsky in the 1980s, building on the work of Ernest Becker, who wrote a book called The Denial of Death that won the Pulitzer Prize the year after he died. The core finding is this: human beings are the only animals who know they're going to die. And that knowledge, when it sits unexamined in the background of your mind, shapes almost every decision you make. Becker's argument was that civilization itself, art, religion, status hierarchies, legacy projects, all of it, is largely a response to death terror. We build things that outlast us. We attach ourselves to groups and ideologies that feel permanent. We chase fame and achievement because some part of us believes that if enough people remember our name, we won't really be gone. This isn't philosophy. Researchers have tested it in controlled studies. When people are primed to think about their own death, even subliminally, they become more defensive about their worldview, more hostile to people who think differently, more materialistic, more status conscious. The technical term is mortality salience. The plain English is: remind someone they're going to die and watch how quickly they start clinging. Now bring this back to David checking his phone at 2 a.m. He wasn't afraid of wasting time. He was afraid of non-existence. The phone was a way of confirming he was still here, still connected, still mattering to someone. Every scroll was a small reassurance that he hadn't disappeared yet. This is what overcoming fear of death actually requires you to see first. The fear isn't showing up as fear. It shows up as workaholism, people-pleasing, status-chasing, the inability to sit still, the compulsive need to be productive, the terror of being alone with your thoughts. These are all the same fear wearing different clothes. The practical takeaway from this section is not to fix anything yet. It's to start noticing. The next time you feel anxious about your career, or you can't stop comparing yourself to someone else, or you feel that low-grade dread on a Sunday evening, ask one question: is some part of me afraid of not mattering, of being forgotten, of being erased? 9 times out of 10, the honest answer is yes, and naming it is the first move. The Bhagavad Gita opens on a battlefield. Arjuna, a warrior, has just looked across the field and seen his relatives, his teachers, his friends on the opposing side. He collapses. He tells Krishna he can't fight, can't go on, doesn't see the point. And Krishna's response, which takes up the next 17 chapters, begins with one of the most direct statements in all of ancient literature. The soul is never born nor dies at any time. It has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. It is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. It is not slain when the body is slain. Now, if you're secular, I want you to stay with me here, because this isn't asking you to believe in a soul in any religious sense. What the Vedic framework is pointing at is something much more specific and much more useful. The core teaching is this: you have over-identified with something temporary. You think you are your body, your career, your reputation, your relationships, your bank account, and because all of those things are genuinely temporary, you live in constant low-grade terror that they will be taken from you. That terror is not irrational, it's just aimed at the wrong target. The Vedic tradition makes a distinction that modern psychology is only beginning to catch up to. There is the contents of consciousness, your thoughts, your memories, your personality, your body, and then there is consciousness itself, the thing that is aware of all of those contents. You can observe your thoughts. That means you are not your thoughts. You can observe your emotions. That means you are not your emotions. You can observe your body aging. That means there is something in you that is watching, and that thing has never aged. Neuroscientists and philosophers of mind call this the hard problem of consciousness. They can map every neuron and still cannot explain why there is a subjective experience happening at all. The Vedic tradition isn't confused about this. It starts there. Consciousness is the ground, not the product. What this reframe does practically is it shifts the question. Instead of how do I stop being afraid of death, the question becomes what in me is actually aware of this fear right now? And when you sit with that question, something interesting happens. The awareness itself has no edges. It doesn't feel like it started this morning. It doesn't feel like it's about to end. This is not a belief you adopt, it's an observation you can make right now. Modern contemplative research backs this up. Studies on long term meditators show measurable reductions in death anxiety, not because they've convinced themselves of a doctrine, but because sustained attention to the nature of awareness itself changes the relationship to impermanence. When you stop confusing the contents of your experience with the awareness that holds those contents, the fear of losing the contents becomes less absolute. This is the second piece of overcoming fear of death, not a belief upgrade, but a perceptual shift. You are not trying to convince yourself that death is fine. You are investigating what in you is actually present right now underneath all the noise. There's a concept from Stoic philosophy that the Vedic tradition echoes almost exactly. Memento mori, remember that you will die. Not as a morbid exercise, as a clarifying one. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. He wasn't trying to depress himself. He was using the awareness of death as a filter for what actually mattered. The Vedic concept that parallels this is called viveka, discernment, the ability to distinguish between what is real and permanent and what is temporary and illusory. When death anxiety is running unconsciously in the background, viveka collapses. You can't distinguish between what you genuinely value and what you're chasing because you're terrified of disappearing. The two feel identical. Here's a concrete example. Someone stays in a career they hate for 20 years because leaving feels like a kind of death. The identity, the title, the salary, the sense of being someone, all of it is wrapped up in that job. Leaving it feels like annihilation. So they stay, not because they've chosen to stay, because death anxiety is choosing for them. Or someone sabotages a relationship the moment it gets serious, not because they don't want connection, because deep intimacy requires you to be seen, and being truly seen means you could truly be lost. The vulnerability of love is a vulnerability to a kind of death, the death of the protected self. So the unconscious mind engineers an exit before the real exposure happens. This is what terror management theory predicts and what the Vedic texts describe in different language. When you don't have a stable relationship with your own consciousness, with the part of you that is the observer rather than the observed, you will use every external structure available to manage the terror. Status, busyness, relationships, ideology, substances. Anything that creates the feeling of permanence. The practical move here is what I'd call the mortality filter. It's a 3-question check you run on any major decision that's producing anxiety. First, is the fear attached to this decision actually about the outcome, or is it about losing an identity? Second, if I knew this body had 5 years left, would I still make this choice? Third, what would I do if I wasn't afraid of being forgotten? These aren't rhetorical questions, they're diagnostic. The answers will tell you immediately whether you're making a choice from your actual values or from death anxiety, wearing the costume of practical thinking. The Gita's answer to Arjuna's paralysis wasn't stop being afraid. It was understand what you actually are and then act from that. Arjuna's fear was real. His confusion about his own nature was the problem. Once that confusion was addressed, the action became clear. Overcoming fear of death doesn't mean you stop caring about your life. It means you stop confusing the life you're living with the awareness that is living it. That distinction, once you feel it, changes what you're willing to do, what you're willing to let go of, and what you stop wasting energy protecting. That mortality filter works on paper, but applying it to your own specific situation, the career, the relationship, the pattern you keep repeating, that's where most people get stuck. If you've been sitting with this material and you can feel the shape of what's holding you back, but you can't quite see through it on your own, the next step is a conversation. I do free one on one calls, 15 to 30 minutes, no pitch, completely personal. We look at exactly where you are right now, what the real friction is, and you walk away with a clear next step, whether we ever talk again or not. The link to book is in the description at dailymindreset.com/consultation. If you've tried working through this kind of anxiety on your own and you keep circling back to the same place, that's the sign. One conversation can do what months of solo effort can't. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Tell me in the comments, what's one area of your life where you suspect death anxiety is making decisions for you?